When you think of the phrase guitar hero, there's one name that almost always comes to mind: Eric Clapton. But behind the legend, behind the nickname God, there's a much more fascinating, much more human story. This is the story of a man who never quite felt comfortable on the pedestal the world built for him.
Let's go back for a moment. Picture post-war Britain. It's a gray, quiet world, a country still catching its breath. But in the silence, there's a new sound starting to hum. It's the sound of electricity, of anticipation. A whole generation, born into this world of make-do and mend, was hungry for something raw, something with a bit of soul.
And they found that soul in a sound that came from thousands of miles away. It was the sound of the American blues, played on a 6-string guitar. Young kids were about to take that music, born in the Mississippi Delta, plug it into a British amplifier, and turn it up loud enough for the whole world to hear. So by the early 1960s, London's music scene was buzzing with this new energy. Sure, pop music was on the radio, but in the dark, smoky clubs, something else was taking hold. You had this new wave of musicians obsessively listening to records by artists like Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson, trying to figure out not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. And right there, in the middle of it all, was a quiet, intense young guitarist named Eric Clapton.
You know what's really telling about Clapton's early days isn't the bands he joined, but the ones he left. He gets kicked out of art school because the guitar was all that mattered. Then he joins the Yardbirds, a band right on the edge of breaking big. But he walks out. Why? Because their big hit, For Your Love, was too pop for him. For Clapton, this was never about chasing fame. It was a crusade for blues purity. And his next move, joining John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, was like finding his church. And with the Blues Breakers, well, this is where it all explodes. He didn't just find his voice, he completely unleashed it. John Mayall's band was like a training ground for the absolute best blues players in Britain, and Eric shot straight to the top. His playing on that legendary Beano album was a total game changer. It was fast, aggressive, fluid, and just dripping with emotion.
So how did he get that sound? Well, a huge part of it was this technical shift right here. He ditched his Fender Telecaster for a Gibson Les Paul and, crucially, plugged it into a new, powerful Marshall amp. The result was absolutely seismic. It created this thick, heavy, sustained tone that no one had ever really heard before. It let him bend strings into these long, screaming notes. This wasn't just a change in equipment, it was the birth of a legend's sound.
That sound was so powerful that pretty soon, graffiti started appearing on walls around London. Just 3 words: Clapton is God. It was the start of a whole new kind of hero worship in rock music. But Clapton himself? He was horrified by it. He later said he never believed he was the best, he just always wanted to be the best. And right there, that's the great paradox of Eric Clapton. The world saw a god, but he just saw a student who was never quite satisfied.
And even his most famous nickname, Slowhand, tells you a lot about him. It's not about playing fast. Back with the Yardbirds, he'd bend his strings so hard they'd often snap, and when one broke, he'd just stand there on stage and calmly change it. The audience, instead of getting impatient, would start this slow, rhythmic clap, a slow hand clap. It was a name born out of pure respect for his craftsmanship.
Okay, so he'd mastered the traditional blues. What do you do next? You blow it to pieces. In 1966, he teams up with the phenomenal rhythm section of Jack Bruce on bass and the wild Ginger Baker on drums. They called themselves Cream, and they were rock's very first supergroup. They took the blues framework and just launched it into orbit with these long, loud, improvisational jams that were unlike anything anyone had ever heard.
I mean, the chemistry was just insane. You had Ginger Baker's complex, jazzy drumming and Jack Bruce's bass lines that were so melodic, they were like a second lead guitar. This wasn't a backing band. It was 3 virtuosos in a high-stakes musical conversation. And that freed up Clapton to push his guitar to the absolute limit. It's where he perfected his famous woman tone. He'd roll the tone knob off on his Gibson, turn his Marshall amp all the way up, and get this sound that was so thick and smooth it sounded like a human voice singing.
But just as everyone was ready to crown Clapton the undisputed king, a comet named Jimi Hendrix landed in London. Hendrix didn't just play the guitar, he made it sound like it was from another planet. He used feedback and effects pedals to create entire soundscapes. For Clapton, who was so grounded in blues tradition, Hendrix was a complete shock to the system. He was both inspiring and, frankly, a bit terrifying, and he changed the game for everyone.
After Cream burned out, Clapton was a little lost. He was tired of the guitar theatrics and wanted to focus more on songwriting. But his next great creative burst wouldn't come from ambition, it would come from agony. He fell hopelessly in love with Patty Boyd, who just happened to be married to his best friend George Harrison.
And this wasn't just a crush, it was an all-consuming obsession. A friend saw how tormented he was and gave him a book, a 12th century Persian poem called The Story of Layla and Majnun. As Clapton read this ancient story of a man driven mad by his love for an unattainable woman, he saw his own life staring back at him. That poem became the direct inspiration for his greatest work. You have to understand, this album, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, wasn't just a collection of songs. It was forged in this intense fire of friendship, betrayal, and unrequited love. Every single note on that record is soaked in his desperation and his guilt. It's essentially a diary of a man's heartbreaking, set to music.
And the sound of that heartbreak was made immortal by a chance meeting. Clapton was introduced to an incredible slide guitarist from America named Duane Allman. They became instant musical brothers. Allman's wailing slide guitar on the song Layla isn't just a solo, it's the other voice in the conversation, echoing Clapton's pain. Their two guitars weaving together is one of the most iconic sounds in rock history, right before that beautiful, tragic piano piece closes the whole thing out.
But creating a masterpiece didn't solve his problems. The Layla album was a commercial flop at first. Then his new musical soulmate, Duane Allman, was killed in an accident. Heartbroken and feeling rejected, Clapton just disappeared. He fell into a deep heroin addiction, which he later swapped for severe alcoholism. For most of the 1970s, the music world's biggest guitar hero was largely silent. After a very long, very difficult struggle, Clapton finally got sober in the late 80s. It really seemed like he turned a corner. But then, in 1991, an absolutely unthinkable tragedy struck. His 4-year-old son, Connor, died after falling from a high-rise window in New York. The loss was so immense, so devastating, it could have destroyed him for good.
And in that absolute pit of despair, he turned to the only thing he had left, his guitar. He said it himself, "I almost subconsciously used music for myself as a healing agent, and lo and behold, it worked." The song he wrote, Tears in Heaven, wasn't for an album or for the charts. It was for him. It was a quiet, painful conversation with the son he'd lost. It was music as pure survival.
What happened next was truly remarkable. In 1992, he recorded a simple, acoustic set for MTV's Unplugged, and he played Tears in Heaven. The album went on to become one of the biggest of his career. It won 6 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. It was one of the most incredible comebacks in music history, born from the deepest tragedy. And those 6 Grammys are just a part of the 18 he's won over his entire career.
So today, Eric Clapton is one of the elder statesmen of rock and blues. Through his Crossroads Guitar Festival, he's become a kind of curator for the music that he loves, giving a platform to new artists and paying tribute to the old masters who inspired him. The fiery young guitar god of the 60s has become a living connection to the roots of the music itself.
His place in history is, well, it's undeniable. I mean, just look at this. He is the only person to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 separate times. Once with the Yardbirds, once with Cream, and once as a solo artist. That's a completely unique achievement. It's the ultimate official recognition.
But here's the final perfect Clapton twist. The man who has been honored by the Hall of Fame more than anyone else has pretty much dismissed it. He recently called it a frat boys club and criticized it for ignoring real innovators like J.J. Cale. It shows that even after all the awards and accolades, there's still a part of him that sees himself as an outsider, questioning the very idea of a legacy.
So, who is Eric Clapton, really? Is he the reluctant god of the 60s, the establishment icon with 3 Hall of Fame rings, or the rebel who still doesn't trust the institutions? Maybe. In the end, the answer is the simplest one. He's a bluesman, a lifelong student of the music who through incredible highs and unimaginable lows learned how to tell his own story with a guitar.